Um, I'm actually shooting this video on a different cell phone this evening just because I feel like doing it. And I just want to, try that. I'm trying out a new cell phone tonight. So, um, if everything looks just a tiny bit different, I'm not normal. I'm shooting this video on, you know, like I said, different cell phones. So if everything looks a little different, that would be why. Hmm. Well, anyway, with that said, I know it's probably been a minute since, I've actually done a review on here of something. Well, in case you haven't been aware, uh, over on my other channel since like April of this year, I've been dealing with, well, some demons that, I've went into great detail over on my regular main channel, my Ghosties in Kentucky channel. So if you want to know like the full unvarnished crazy story, go over there. There's a whole playlist. It's and I'm going to share it in the video description here in a little while for this video so that you can see the whole playlist, and I'll explain everything in that playlist. Speaking of things in the video description for this video, um, I am going to also include a GoFundMe page and some stuff about my book that I published. So that all will be there in the video link or in the video description for this video. But anyway, that aside, I wanted to do a review of a documentary from 2020 that I saw on Tubi, which is called Henry VIII, Man, Monster, Monarch, or something like that. I actually found it on Tubi like, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, and I've been watching it on my television and stuff here at the house, and then like on my phone, when I'd get bored. Well, it's actually a nice little, like, 5, 6 episode maybe, show about documentary about Henry VIII, King Henry VIII of England. And it talks about him, like it picks up when he's like, like a tween, what we would call a tween now, like 12, 13 years old, and it goes all the way up through the last episode where he's an adult and he dies. And it's very interesting. Like they talk about like when he becomes king when he's like 17, 18 years old back in the 1500s. How he came up from under his dad Henry VII's thumb, because Henry VII was a bit of a tightwad or something, and and it starts with Henry VIII being younger and living with his mom and what have you at like another castle, because he had an older brother, and most people don't realize this, and I didn't realize it until I started watching documentaries about Henry VIII himself. But Henry VIII actually had an older brother named Prince Arthur. He was the man that was Henry VIII was actually the spare. It would be like, in today's terms, most people know of Prince William and Prince Harry. And literally, Prince Harry, his formal name is Henry, ironically enough. So, Prince Harry, it would be like, and don't get me wrong, I don't wish bad on Prince William. I actually happen to like Prince William a lot. He's like my favorite of the two of them. Not to speak of Prince Harry, but Prince William is my favorite of the two of them. Just because Prince William, and I have to say this, Prince William is what I would call a straight arrow. I mean, and I think his wife, Princess Catherine or Duchess Catherine or whatever she wants to be called, the Princess of Wales, the current Princess of Wales, I think she is so pretty. And, just as an aside, I just happen to really like the two of them. And I think their kids are adorable. They're three kids. But anyway, back to Prince William's brother, Prince Harry. His formal name is Prince Henry. His birth name on his birth certificate is Henry. And well, like Prince Harry, Henry VIII was called Harry, and back in the day, and Henry VIII, just was basically suffocated by his dad, Henry VII, and until the man Henry VII passed away, and like that's what the first episode talks about is, here's this young guy, and Prince Arthur, his older brother, is married to Catherine of Aragon, and Prince Arthur ends up getting sick and dies. It happens, and Prince Arthur was like what? Like, I think he was like 16 or 17 years old, and Prince Henry, who later became Henry VIII, was like 10 or 12 years old approximately at the time. And all of a sudden, Prince Harry goes from being the spare to being the heir, and the Prince of Wales, and all of a sudden, the party's over, and because they weren't expecting Prince Henry to go become Henry VIII. Well, things happen. People get sick and people die. Not to sound malicious, but it happens. Well, Prince Arthur dies, and well, Henry's got to man up at this point, and he's like, 12, 13 years old, and he's got to learn how to, run this show, called the Monarchy over there in England. And Henry VII, Henry VIII's old man, was just very hard on his son. Like they locked Henry VIII up basically in the castle, and Henry VIII basically was going stir crazy because he had quit partying and this, that, and the other thing, and he had to buckle down and learn all this stuff because hey, he's the next one to become King of England, which is basically what Prince William is doing now because his dad I almost called him Prince Charles. I've been calling King Charles III Prince William or Prince Charles for so long. I'm still calling him Prince Charles. I don't mean that as an insult. I kept wanting to call him Prince Charles. I don't think so. He's been King Chuck III for almost a year now. It is just I think I'm not the only person with this problem still wanting to call King Charles III Prince Charles. I don't mean it as an insult, and I hope that if King Charles III sees this video, Your Majesty, I don't mean that as an insult. I've just been calling you something for so long. It's like, I have to catch myself. I'm still, it's, the Queen has been the Queen for, 47 years of my life, and and most of his too. So, it is what it is. No offense. But yeah, back to Henry VIII. What ends up happening is not so much Henry VIII, but Henry VII, his old man. Well, Catherine of Aragon was kind of, like Prince Arthur's, widow at this point. And, she's like, what, 7, 8 years older than Henry VIII is at this point. And, well, time passes. It's like 5, 6 years pass. And Henry VII kicks off and dies. And, here Henry VIII is at, 17, 18 years old, and he's now, the big man. Here's the big dog on the scene finally. instead of, him playing second fiddle to his dad. And I'm sure that King Charles III can tell you all about what it's like to have to wait, waiting in the wings for, the person who's running the show to bow out, i.e., in other words, die, and take over the monarchy. I'm sure King Charles III can tell you all about that. Or Prince William, because Prince William's now in his dad's spot that his dad's, been waiting in the wings for, 70 years, give or take, approximately. The two of them can tell you what that feels like, and, all of a sudden Henry VIII is, the big dog in charge. And, there's Catherine of Aragon. In fact, Henry VII told Henry VIII, hey, look, dude, marry your brother's widow and, rub a few out with her, see if, you can make an heir or what have you. Well, that's what happens is, 18-year-old Henry VIII marries Catherine of Aragon, and, they try to, have kids. Obviously they had one that made it to that lived and made it to adulthood. That would be Bloody Mary or Mary the First. Queen Elizabeth the First's older half sister. And Catherine of Aragon with Henry VIII, and they talk about this, they had I think 6 or 7 kids, and some of them were boys, but none of them lived long enough to, take over, because they die at either they would be born asleep, be stillborn. That's the polite way of saying they were stillborn. They would either be born asleep or, they'd live a few months and then die from complications, or they'd catch some kind of random illness or SIDS or whatever it was back then, and they die from it. And it's been, and it didn't get mentioned in this particular documentary, but it's I've seen documentaries before on Henry VIII, and they think that Henry VIII had some kind of genetic thing going on where I think it's called Kells syndrome or something that sounds like that. It's like a K name, where what it is, he can get, his wife pregnant, but there's complications with, the child being born healthy, alive, and normal to an extent. And, he, has a lot of issues with that. Well, and that's part of the reason why only Mary Tudor or Bloody Mary or Mary the First was the only child of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon to make it, out of childhood and into adulthood. It was an issue, and of course that's the same issue that, Henry VIII had with Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth I was the only child that Henry VIII was able to have with Anne Boleyn that made it, out, to be born and make it to adulthood. As a matter of fact, that was in the first and second episodes where they were talking about Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth I. And they were talking about the fact that Thomas Cranmer, who was whispering in Henry VIII's ear after Henry VIII split with Rome and married Anne Boleyn after she just totally just kept stringing Harry along and stringing him along and stringing him along. And he got rid of, Thomas Wolsey, who was Henry VIII's advisor for like the longest time, and that's Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. Don't be like, he was a cardinal, dude. Yeah, I like realized that the man was a cardinal. But part of the reason why they got rid of Cardinal Wolsey is because he was apparently rubbing a few people the wrong way, because Cardinal Wolsey, had started from like nothing, and he was a self-made man. It was like the American dream, like a few hundred years before America was even a country. I mean, the dude did what a lot of Americans, you know, want to do now is, be a self-made person, which that's what Cardinal Wolsey did. So did Thomas Cranmer, you know. Uh, and just as an aside, Cardinal Wolsey, I don't think people realize this, but I mean, like, it might have gotten mentioned in like the TV show The Tudors, kind of like as a passing comment or what have you. Uh, but Thomas Wolsey, even though he was a Roman Catholic cardinal, had mistresses and, was, pretty active in the area that he should not have been for a cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church. And if you know anything about Catholicism, any priests, monks, friars, cardinals, the Pope himself aren't supposed to be doing that, if you know what I mean. Well, anyway, Hampton Hall belonged to Cardinal, and he gave it to Henry VIII. Just because, he was butt kissing, basically, Henry VIII, to keep Henry from, looking at Cardinal Wolsey and going, adios, dude, But yeah, it's like they get rid of him. Cardinal Wolsey actually, and they talk about this at the end of the first show, right when Henry VIII was about to send Cardinal Wolsey to the Tower of London to be, killed, Cardinal Wolsey up and died in his own house. Like, he was, like, it showed him, the guy portraying Wolsey, walking with the cane, and he just kind of goes, and just keels over, drops dead of his own accord, and just, that's it. And it's just the whole first few episodes were very interesting, especially about, Catherine of Aragon and how her and Henry were married for like 20 some years, and the problem that Henry VIII had was something that was a holdover from Henry VII. Henry VIII's old man was, secure the dynastic stuff, and that's why Henry VIII was so bent on having a son. Edward the Sixth or Seventh, the son that Henry VIII eventually does wind up having with Jane Seymour. And I'm not talking about the lady from Dr. Quinn. That's a completely different. Yeah, he got his freak on with, the lady that played Dr. Quinn. No, two totally different people with the same name, And, and I have to say, like, Jane Seymour, that was married to Henry VIII, totally different person from the lady that played Dr. Quinn. Two totally different people with the same name. If you go look it up on Wikipedia, you'll be like, wait a minute. There's a lady that was married to Henry VIII, and then there was, the lady that played Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, or was in, the 007 movies. One of them, as a Bond girl. Not the same person. Well, anyway, after, like what Henry VIII did was, like with Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour was the Queen's lady in waiting, and Henry VIII was kind of canoodling around with her, before his current wife kind of bowed out, died, or got chucked out of court. Um, and they talked about it. Anne Boleyn lost her head on, at the Tower of London, and like they falsely accused her of treason and adultery and getting her freak on with her own brother and just a whole lot of whatnot. And, Henry VIII sounded like, and it's like as they're talking, I'm like thinking, Henry VIII sounds a lot like what we would call today a narcissist. He did. And it's like I'm sitting there watching this thinking, that man sounds like a narcissist to me. I don't know. I mean, he had very, like they said, like the man was mentally unhinged to a point. He wanted everybody to, like, from the description, I mean, it does. Like, if you look up the description of a narcissist, like what they describe Henry VIII of being, emotionally insecure and worried about what everybody thinks about him, and can't handle criticism. And he actually, and they talk about it in this documentary about, called Henry VIII Man, Monarch, Monster, or whatever, something like that. Like they talk about Henry VIII made it illegal to say, I hope Henry VIII dies, or, like wishing him dead, or even saying, anything along those lines about him. I mean, he actually made it treason and you could get killed. Like you couldn't say anything like that. And there's like, according to the show, I think it was like episode 3 or 4 where they like talk about this. And, the man, I'm like thinking this man sounds like an unhinged narcissist. And it sounds just like what um, I think. Well, it was said in Arabia in the made for the made for TV movie back in 1999, Arabian Nights, uh, where Jafar tells Scheherazade, I have to deal with the worst kind of madman, a madman with power. That's how everybody felt was, they had to deal with, the worst kind of crazy person, the kind of crazy person with power. And, I mean, you couldn't say, like, did he die? Like, because there's like a part where at one point Henry VIII has a horse, he falls off a horse and like they talk about the fact that the horse fell on top of him during a joust and knocked him unconscious for at least 2 to 4 hours or something in that neighborhood. He was unconscious for at least a couple hours. Well, he wakes up and it just totally, it did, everybody agrees that it traumatized him on some mental level that, it made him crazy, and he probably, I wouldn't be surprised if, they figured out that the man probably ended up with a really bad head concussion. And in fact, it was suggested in this documentary, Monarch, if some of you are wondering. But yeah, they said that, they suspect that he probably ended up with, head trauma. I would say so if you have a big old grown horse, a full grown, probably, you know, 500-pound horse fall on top of you wearing a saddle and armor and whatnot. Yeah, I think, that would seriously hurt you. I mean, I've been around horses enough to where I've rode one, and I've seen jousts up at the Ohio Renaissance Festival up in Harveysburg, Ohio. I've actually seen lance poles flying out into the audience. I mean, I can tell you firsthand that, yeah, jousts are no joke. And just as an aside, they're on the History Channel a few years back, like I'd say probably around 2010, 2012 ish. There was a show on there called Full Contact Jousting or something like that. And one of the guys that used to be up at the Harveysburg, Ohio Renaissance Festival up there in Ohio was like the head of that show. He was like the head judge and whatever. And they actually used rescue horses on this show, just as an aside. And, like they, like on that show, it's like they would show what it's like. I mean, men and women were both jousting on this show, and people would end up with, blood, broke noses, black eyes, like it had messed their faces up pretty badly. And I've actually watched that show. And I'll tell you what, that show is an aside. There, I have to applaud the guy that was from the Ohio Renaissance Festival. You know what he did? He actually threw a person off that show because it was a reality show and it was a competition. It was like, what is it, like Big Brother or something like that, where like, they make it down to like the final one and like they win something, or like, The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, something like that, except for it's not romance. It's, a competition to see, about jousting. But yeah, one guy on there punched one of the horses because it bit him. And the guy from the Ohio Renaissance Festival looked at the guy and said, "You're off of here because you punched the horse." And he's like, you don't abuse the horses. It's like if you want to be on the show, granted, sometimes these horses get tired, they get stressed, they're, living beings like the rest of us, and they get, they have like some of them have emotions and get tired, get frustrated, whatever. And hello to whoever's joining. If that's you, Rosie, hello. But anyway, the guy threw one of the competitors off the show. And, that's what happened. And I'm like, I actually saw that episode. That's how come I know it happened. And I'm like, go. I thought it was wonderful. But anyway, back to Henry VIII. It's, having watched that jousting show, yeah, I mean, it's like it gave me a total frame of reference, and having seen it live at the Ohio Renaissance Festival up there in Harveysburg, yeah, it can be pretty gruesome and violent. I mean, this way it's like, some of the men could get that out of their systems or whatever, with the jousting. But, there was that. And then he somehow I think he hurt his leg on top of it and whatever with the jousting, Henry VIII did. And he, like by the time he got old, like, in his 40s, it was, like infected, and like they were like, constantly, he stunk, his sheet stunk. He probably was getting gangrene in his leg. They probably should have just cut his leg off at the knee and been done with it. Not to sound malicious, but, or they should have done some more than like poke him with hot pokers and stuff and drained it and whatever. Because having dealt with my husband and him having gangrene, I'll tell you, the stuff stinks worse than I can put words on. I mean, if you've never smelled gangrene, consider yourself lucky. Okay, because it's nasty. It looks nasty. It smells nasty. And like I said at the beginning of this video, I'm not even going to go into detail on that because it's like, and I've actually got a whole set of videos that that I'll share on here later on, or the link will be in the description. But anyway, I wanted to tell you all, this documentary on Henry VIII is actually very much worth a watch, and, it's on Tubi, which is free, I mean, granted, it has commercials and whatever in it, but, I recommend watching it because it really truly is worth a watch. Well, Anyway, I'm going to pause here and I will talk to y'all later. Bye.